We have in the studio a political sociologist from the University of the Philippines and the Australian National University. Please welcome Dr. Nicole Curato. Good morning and welcome to Solar Daybreak.
Good morning. Thanks for inviting me.
With the President's SONA yesterday, do you think he was able to connect to Filipinos?
Yes, that's a very difficult question because it feels like in any SONA, there is really that inherent tension between being a cheerleader, you're the commander-in-chief, you're the head of this country, you want to boost the morale of everyone, that's why you want to bring out the good news, right? As well as attract foreign investors. So it felt like he was being a cheerleader in yesterday's SONA, sometimes at the expense of some people that he criticized. But on the other hand, you're also an elected official that's expected to be accountable to your bosses. And if you're accountable, you have to be honest. And rather than just giving the good news, you need to give an honest account of why there are shortcomings and what accounts for these shortcomings. He did that somehow with the PPP, for example. He explained why there's not a lot of PPPs that's happening, and they're reviewing contracts, they're revisiting some studies. So I think that's a good thing, because that is what an accountable official does. He explains. But there's not a lot of that. There's not a lot of explanation. There was a lot of cheerleading, but not a lot of explanation and accountability.
What should he have added to what he had said for an hour and 42 minutes?
For example, the claims about chairs and classrooms, for example. We've heard that last year. We reviewed the SONA transcripts from last year, and they're quite similar, that theme. But instead of saying we're going to complete this by the end of the year, maybe an account of why it hasn't been completed in the previous year would have made more sense. Because I think he has to speak to the people and not just ride on his high popularity ratings and expect that people will just accept what he's saying regardless because he's popular. I think in order for democracy to be more mature, we must be able to, or our president must be able to hold himself accountable and explain why those chairs weren't delivered, why those targets were not met, and what he's doing differently and his cabinet is doing differently this time around.
So you think the SONA should not just be what his plans are for his next term, but also an explanation of what has transpired in the last term?
I think so, because that's a more meaningful way of going about it. Because otherwise you will have skeptical people like myself, for example, who would ask, I've heard that last year. Why is this any different? I think there will be more legitimacy and credibility to the SONA if the president was able to accept the mistakes and explain why those mistakes happened.
He talks about, he vowed for inclusive growth. Was that the message that he brought out from the SONA?
It's very interesting you raised the question of the message, because as far as the form of the speech is concerned, it felt that the message wasn't that clear. What is the narrative structure of this speech? What is the main message? For example, he was talking about a lot of savings in government, and he was giving all of these facts and figures. What does that mean to me as a taxpayer? If I were to revise that speech, I would say that we have these savings, which is an indication that we are exercising fiscal prudence, for example, and we are using your tax money properly, and we're not putting it to waste. I think that extra step of explaining how, for example, the taxes are being used, or what do all of these achievements mean for inclusive growth to me as a Filipino in my everyday life. I think there was a bit of a misstep in terms of explanation.
What about the use of case studies? They had videos and they had interviews with those who took part in government programs. What did you think about that, the use of that?
I find that really interesting, because when I teach research methods to my students, sometimes we say that, yes, statistics aren't exactly the best way to express a particular message. So when you have these case studies, it personifies all of these statistics. But one of the difficulties there is the question of representation and authenticity. Does this really represent the experience of so many people? Whereas, for example, we hear a lot of reports on how the CCT, for example, is being mishandled, on how some families can't withdraw the CCT money from their ATMs because their banking system does not work in their province. So all of these things, it's good to have these case studies, but again, we can't avoid being critical, or at least being, having a critical reading of what these case studies actually mean. But it's interesting because the rhetorical style of the case studies is very reminiscent of GMA as well. You have human props, you have the bangkang papel last time, and then now you have your model cops, your model citizens. So in a way, that rhetorical style is quite similar.
But you know, it just came out in the newspaper that 7 out of 10 are satisfied with the SONA. What's your personal opinion?
Right. I think that statistics just reinforces the trust ratings that just came out yesterday from Pulse, and consistently as well in the past surveys, the president has been enjoying a net satisfaction rating that is positive. What's interesting for me as a sociologist, which I can't interpret at this point, is that in the same survey where he has a high popularity rating, there's also an increasing admission of hunger and self-rated poverty. It's in the same survey. So to me, how do I interpret that? Are these problems not necessarily attributed to the president? Or do the poor, for example, think that the president is doing enough, it's just that we're hungry? So it's very challenging to interpret what that means. High popularity ratings, but high levels of self-declared hunger and poverty.
Do you think there are issues that he should have focused more on?
Yes, I'm very happy you asked that, because to me that issue is inequality. He talked about inclusive growth, which is excellent. But I think one of the major problems that we have now, when you have a fast-growing economy, but there is widening disparity, I think that's a big problem. When you have the top 40 richest family in the Philippines doubling their income, and then you have the poor not having the same benefits, then you're broadening the inequality. So it's not just the growth that we have to celebrate, but we also have to question, well, whose growth? Who's benefiting from this growth, and at whose expense? So that's why I'm quite happy when he talked about agriculture, for example, because that's where the loss of employment came from in the last statistic. Like, there was increase in jobs and services, for example, but the reason why the employment rate or the unemployment rate was steady is because we lost jobs in agriculture. But again, I think that was a missed opportunity in the SONA to explain that we're investing in agriculture because people are losing jobs in agriculture, and this is what we plan to do. So I think, again, it's a matter of bringing out that message that we are trying to invest in these important industries where a lot of people are part of.
Who was he speaking with?
Yes,
I mean, SONA?
I consider myself an educated person, but when I hear the president saying, I want to pass a cabotage law, what is that, right? And so who is he speaking to? And when he's talking about all of these statistics, is it a report to investors? Is it a report to investors saying that you're welcome, you can now invest in the Philippines, we have all of these excellent figures? So in a way, for me, that was the effect. It felt like, especially the first half, felt like a technical report. It's like a CEO reporting to shareholders. So it's very tricky, because if he's speaking to his bosses, I don't think he was very successful in doing that.
When you're referring to the public.
Yes, exactly. And ultimately, he keeps on saying towards the end that, yeah, I owe you this presidency, we are in it together, SONA nyo to. And then the first half was really, okay, what does that mean to me? It wasn't really that clear.
So how do you think this SONA is different from the past SONA?
That's a good question, because I don't think it's that much different. If anything, the biggest difference from my understanding is there was less sarcasm in relation to the corruption allegations in the GMA administration. Although I was quite happy, because one of my biggest worries is that now that we're in the midterm, he might use the SONA to start attacking political opponents to prepare for 2016. I'm happy he didn't do that. I'm happy it wasn't a platform for mudslinging for potential political contenders. But in any case, we were talking yesterday that, wow, this is really boring, primarily because the barbs, the side comments from the previous administration was gone, although there were some references to that too. But that form aside, that rhetorical strategy aside, it felt like the structure of the SONA is more or less the same, the content was more or less the same, which is really a shopping list of achievements.
So and lastly, what should his SONA be next time?
I think more explanation and more of trying to get the people on board and telling us what can we do even though we're not technically part of government. Because in his social contract with the people, there is really that emphasis of working with the people, of political participation, and that's one of the hallmarks of his administration. So to me, I would like to hear more of that. What can we do with you? What can we do as citizens? And what can the government give us in return? That kind of relationship that he can build with the people, because after all, that's what his administration is all about.
Something that the people can relate to.
Exactly.
Okay, so thank you so much, Dr. Nicole Curato, for joining us this morning.
Thank you.